coming. I didn't want to start right on time because I know there's a lot of you here, like my mom and Chrissy Otis. It's, I think, a little bit of a Greek tradition, maybe, a Mediterranean tradition. Anyway, I wanted to let you guys just give you a quick introduction. So I just wanted to just briefly touch upon George and let his reading and him do the talking. Pass the baton, so to speak, to George. I'm happy to. George is kind enough to come here and share his poetry with us. We're lucky to have this him here. He is both a Winthrop native, a long-term resident, and an academic, a scholar. From what I hear, he is a Renaissance man in the modern era. So let's give George a round of applause and what he has to say.
Thank you so much, John. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep. The first thing I want to do is thank the Lodge, but also I hope people noticed the magnificent framing gallery that John has. And he's been a great support to the town. The name of my book is Winthropos, which is the Greekified name that my father gave to the town. And I want to show you some images before we get started. My father came from this village, which is called Acknowledgements, and it's in the southern part of Greece, in Arcadia, way, way up in the mountains, really near the top of a peak. And I think you can see those mountains in the background, and the Homeric backdrop of that. If you can go to the next image. These shots were taken from a drone. That's another shot to just give you a sense of how isolated the village was. And they came, my father and his two brothers were teenagers when they left that village. And their mother saw 4 boys leave and never saw them again because she died right after World War II. It was in the late 30s. And I'll talk more about her in a minute. You can go to the next one, to the family photo. That's the only photograph we have of my father's family. And my brother's here, and he has wonderful kids and a wonderful wife. They have photographs of everything, as most people do today. But this was the only photograph. And this is my grandmother. I'm going to talk more about her. That's my grandfather. That's my father. That's my Uncle Peter. And some of Peter's kids are here, Jimmy and Angie. And that's my Uncle Charlie. It's my father's sisters. And this is the older uncle who was kind of photoshopped in. I don't know how they did it, but he was in America and they added him. But I remember my Uncle Charlie saying that it was the first time he had shoes, he wore shoes, was to take this picture. Wow. Let's go to one more. This picture of my grandmother and my grandfather, my grandmother with a hand over the chest. It's a photograph that haunted me as a kid. And I'm going to come back to her at the end of the reading because she remained behind and was in her house when the Nazis got to that village. And some terrible things happened there. Okay, I want to read this first poem. It's not on the handout, but it's on the screen. The riddle of the Sphinx is, what's the creature that walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 at night? And the answer in the Greek is anthropos, human being, because the baby crawls, and then the adult walks upright, and then in old age, the person walks with a cane. So that's kind of behind this poem. Winthropos. And if you get lost, Yurgaki, what will you do? I'll find some older people and tell them my name. Anything else? I'll tell them where I live. And where is that? 45 Locust Ave. And where is that? Winthrop. Then comes his vague, Winthrop, Yorgaki? Or is it Winthropos? Only now that I'm older than he ever was, and even in late middle age, wherever I am in my life, I still don't have the foggiest clue. Do I hear the rhyme? Obvious, unavoidable. It tells me the answer to the Sphinx's riddle is Anthropos, my father pulling my leg. You can go back to the photos for a second. In McGee's Corner, my father and his brothers had a little grocery store, and my cousin Jimmy is here. He did a lot of the delivering of the groceries.
Where's Jimmy?
And a number of the poems come out of that store. If you can just show one more image, go back for a second.
Inside the store?
Yeah, that one there, that's good. And I think this is a shot from the 1950s. So that's a sort of, the town was very good to our family. And they had success with their store. So I want to read this poem. It's about melon. It's called Peponya, and it's on the handout. Peponya. Honeydew melons, swelling their shipping crates, kept cool in the damp cellar dark of my father's store. Out of sight, but never so far out of mind, that every so often a crowbar's iron talon couldn't pry open their plywood lids, suspending the nails like fangs. If ripeness is all, it was all in the way. I saw the way my father cradled Peponya, turning them over slowly enough to keep the luminous pallor of their moist complexions fresh, still bright in the long look back through the cellar dark. All in the way he'd never say what he saw, but set them gently back down in their wooden crates. Then every so often another aura would hover there in the afterglow of a dangling bulb's interrogating glare, which still can make my father's sisters appear, crouching together before a crumbling wall. I mean in that black and white snapshot my mother kept on her perfume dresser with its oval mirror, and those open, kerchiefed faces staring back from the open fields late in the 1930s, as if a crowbar angled into the dark with leverage enough to release the fragrant, opulent sheen of those who never cross over the water, but hover near whenever I say Peponya, honeydew melons swelling their shipping crates. My mother suffered from Alzheimer's in her elderly days, and I know there are a number of people here who are caring for loved ones who have Alzheimer's. And this poem is about a prayer I heard her recite. It's called Baby Monitor.
Give me 1 second, please. I'm just going to pull it up so people can follow.
Oh yeah,
along.
this one is on, thank you, this one is on the, this one's on the screen. I don't know if everyone can see it, but if you can, just listen to the lyrics. baby monitor. She's sound asleep, or her Alzheimer's is. I can hear each breath she takes through the monitor I keep on my desk, hooked up as it is to the one upstairs beside her bed. The kind of listening device that's used for keeping track of infants. The tremulous speaker could fit in the palm of your hand. A little green light pulses every time it picks up any trace of my mother's voice. Babble of baby talk and muffled whimpers. Those garbled bits expelled from her speech machine, its plastic speaker propped all night on its stand, calling out softly some rhythmical, ruminant something, so automatic it might be dreaming out loud in my mother's oblivious voice. O sibylline machine that makes the incomprehensible clear. And please help her, and please guide him, and stop it from spreading to the kidneys, please, dear Lord. And make that enough to meet their mortgage payments. I'm privy to a prayer that no one else can hear, at least tonight. Some primal psalm where all are nameless, but none of them forgotten. And please, and please, and please, goes the little green pulsing light. The next one is on the handout, and it's Mr. Chodos. I think there's people in this room who recognize this radiant figure. This is Mr. Chotos. His sons are here. He was like a second father to me. He was an autodidact. He had pretty much taught himself the classics. And there was never a time when I talked to him when he didn't quote the classics and teach me something about life. And I was so pleased when I looked at my classroom roster in my 5th century Athens course, and there was Konstantino Chotos, and it was Nixiotis' son. So I had his grandson in my course. I want to read this poem because of Greek Independence Day, which was March 25th. And many of the people in this audience know the history, but I'll say just a little bit about it. The Greeks got their independence in 1821, and they did it by driving out the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire. It was an unbelievable achievement. And one of the heroes who's mentioned, there's 3 heroes that are mentioned, Makrianis, Kolokotronis, and Drutzos. Kolokotronis was perhaps the greatest of the generals. His wife's family came from that tiny village of Akuvos. And when I was there, the villagers showed me his name that he had carved on the stone. So they're very proud of that. So I'd like to read this poem, Classics Illustrated. There might be some people in the audience who remember Classics comic books. You know what Rolly does? There were actually, I think, more in those days like graphic novels. And they were quite good. I mean, they had Shakespeare in Classics Illustrated. So here's the poem, and it's on the handout. And Mr. Chotos was a waiter all his life at Jimmy's Harborside. Classics Illustrated. late Saturday morning in my best friend's house. I'm 10 years old, reading the Iliad and the classics comic book version, when Mr. Chotos enters the kitchen in his waiter's outfit. He's ready for another 12-hour shift at Jimmy's Harborside in Boston, where he'll be shouldering the loaded trays till midnight. For once, he doesn't greet me with Yasu Yodho. Instead, he picks up the comic book and frowns. Achilles and Hector, he mutters, mythologia. And now, in his native Demotic tongue, the epic pronouncement. The heroes of 1821 are greater than anything in Homer. And then he rattles off the Cleftic Hall of Fame. Makrianis, Golokotronis, Androutos. Then out the back door and down the porch steps he goes. That Greek immigrant from the tiny village of Kokova who fought against the Nazis. His silver tray is shiny as anyone's shield in Homer. Well, it's so important to me that he said the heroes of 1821 are greater than the ancient heroes, because it suddenly made modern Greek history, it gave the modern Greeks such a prominence in my mind. And I went on to study with some very good classicists, but none of them, only for Mr. Chodos was it really alive in every day of his life. I want to read the next poem. Is about another beloved Winthrop resident, no longer with us, and that's Neil Shapiro. And I want to read this poem in memory of Lorraine Shapiro, his widow. Neil, as many of you know, the Performance Center at the new high school was named after Neil. And he was a terrifically talented, charismatic figure in the town, very, very much loved. And, it reminds me that that whole beach area was primarily a Jewish area, with a terrific, vibrant community. And I saw Lee Finch here, and I don't know where she is. There she is with a wonderful bookstore, which is really going in that bookstore and talking to her husband, Simon, started my poetry career. But I want to read this poem for Neil, and it's on the handout. Just my imagination. I was back in Winthrop, driving through the town where I grew up. The radio's off, but passing by the brand new high school, its vintage Motown comes blaring through the Bose speakers and Neil Shapiro's yellow Camaro. The top is down. It's 1971. We're cruising the beach. The Great Temptations are singing as if they could drown in the waves of what keeps running away with them. I love the way they stretch out the crucial noun, imagination. The girls on their towels are lying face up or face down. Their skin is golden brown. Neil is the president of the senior class, as well as the drama club. The sun is a crown on his wavy, luxuriant hair. Not one of our classmates is yet a shade in their underworld cap and gown. As beauty walks by and he sings, I hear a tender rhapsody, but in, now slowing down, reality, she doesn't even know me. Then speeding up to flee, her laughing frown. But no fleeing my yellow fibrosis. Mellifluous term for the terminal cancer that never made a sound as it pulsed to the tribal beat of his chosen blood. And now there's no one around except the renowned Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, intoning their syrupy, scalding tears of a clown they call Pagliacci. Congenial Neil, as white as a ghost, as he waits for the vials to fill. The town conducting a blood drive. The need for Ashkenazi Jews. The Mayo Clinic. The music of Motown. The reel-to-reel cassette, not yet obsolete. The canvas top on the yellow Camaro is down. We're passing the Neil Shapiro Center for the Performing Arts. He's Emerson College bound. I think, if my memory serves, that it was in this very building where the blood drive for Neil was held.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is on the sheet as well. It's called Berlitz School of Language, and I hope that there's a bit of a comedy in this, and that my mother was from Sparta. Her people were from Sparta, and the Spartans have an ancient antagonism with the Athenians. Is my voice carrying all the way
Yes,
over
yeah.
to
Yeah,
people
yeah.
over way over that side? This is called Berlitz School of Language, and it has to do with a problem of pronunciation. Berlitz School of Language. It's Vrisi, not Vrishi, my teacher of modern Greek, who came from modern Greece, corrected me. Her accent was subtle, her English British, but her inflection of the demotic word for fountain lacked the shiny, sibilant splash I always heard whenever one of the elders said, Vrishi. Backwater speech that kept going back to its source. Village springheads whose rustic mountain tongue still sang to us from the mouth of our kitchen faucet. I was a graduate student taking a quick refresher course when I complained to my mother about her pronunciation. Her people were Spartan. She stood by the sink. And where in Greece is she from, this teacher of yours? And when I say Athens, it's Athens, dismissed with a wave of her laconic hand. Oh, I knew it. And then again, the sibilant gush of Vrishi, as fluent as faucet water, washing over the stack of stucco white dishes. There's a word in that. There's a word that I used to describe my mother's hand, laconic. And the Greeks here will know that laconia, lacedaemonia, is Spartan. But it also in English means a kind of terseness that the Spartans had. The next one is on sheet. And if you're part of an immigrant store and your parents are working all day, maybe the worst thing you can do is to break the windshield of the car, family car, which is what I did because my cousin Judy taunted me. So this is called Hades, and Hades is the underworld, and it's the underworld in Homer. And it also mentions Lethe, Lethe is the river of forgetting, the river of oblivion. Hades. I was trying to hit with a rock a paper kite. My taunting cousin was flying above our yard, but struck instead a black DeSoto's windshield. And now my mother stands by the stove, arms akimbo, but face beseeching him to go easy. Just home from work, and still in his butcher's apron, my father kneels before me. Look me here. I lift my head, beholden to what his index finger won't let me avoid. Those disappointed eyes of my immigrant father, who never struck me, but whose old world admonitions always left me badly shaken. As if I'd betrayed his grave injunction, you, my right hand. But this time he winks and says instead, do you like Mama to make for you a baby sister, Yorko? I think I nodded my head, then ran outside, but not before I heard my mother's shriek of sheer elation's laughter, sunlit and soaring. Sometimes in dreams, my father grips my shoulder. Look me here, he says, his glasses obscured by smoky grease from the meats or the filth of Lethe. And you, my right hand, so many errant throws, but only one that cracks with a rock, our black DeSoto's windshield, and lets me hear their laughter. My parents down there where nothing breaks the silence. One of the things you can do as a poet, is to use the sort of speech that you hear. And my father's vernacular of "look me here," in the poem, and you, my right hand. In the poem, I can take you, my right hand, and address my writing hand, and say so many poems that never worked, but this one, poem about breaking the windshield, brings back their voices. I think I'll read two more. Is that
Yeah.
Okay, that's my father, and that's my Uncle Peter. And they came, as I said, they were teenagers, and as very, very young men, they were drafted into World War II. So they come from the mountains of Peloponnesos. They come here, they stay a few years, and then they're on their way to the Philippines, probably knowing very little of the language. You can go to the next photo. Actually, the one where they're kneeling. This is on the island of Pealaliu. And what happened is my Uncle Peter was able to get a furlough, and he came to the island, and my father's in the helmet, and he met his brother. And that was after 3 years of the war. And when I was a kid and I was reading the Iliad, this was like Achilles and Patroclus to me, the two great warriors. But I'd like to read this poem because this poem is called RCA Victor, if you can get that one up. Because while they were there in the Philippines, the Nazis had, for whatever reason, had made it all the way up to Oddfellows, where their mother was. And my Uncle Charlie, and I think my cousin Angie could confirm this because she's in this poem as well. We don't know exactly what happened to her, but my Uncle Charlie swore on his deathbed told me this very poignant story, and I'll just give you the sort of basic details. The rest of it is in the poem. But his mother loved music, so he sent her a Victrola right before the war started out. My Uncle Charlie was the youngest. He did not get drafted. And my grandmother's house had 2 stories, and it was at the height of the village, and the Nazis made it their headquarters. And they played classical music on the Victrola. But when they left, they started burning the furniture, probably because of the Greek resistance, which was very strong in the Peloponnesos. And according to my uncle, she didn't want the record player to be thrown into the fire. And they threw her into the fire.
Oh, God.
But the grave says that she was buried in 1946, which could be that the bodies were dug up again and then interred because they couldn't do it during the war. So it's one of those stories, unfortunately there's millions of them, and they're happening now in Ukraine, but we'll never know, probably never know the true story. But this one is a little bit longer, and maybe you can scroll along, John, as we go.
Sure.
RCA Victor. It's the O in Victrola, as dark as the O in Gladiola is golden. Opens the mouth of my uncle's shade, who tells me about the abyss and the ancient brass horn of a record player. The one he sent to his mother in Akuvos, way up in the Peloponnesos, whose songs are steeped in open vowels, whose echoes I hear in polemos, my father's brother's word for war, whose O's go back to Homer, whose gift was the brute, operatic music of polemos. It's the O at the end of Figaro, or a figment of my imagination, allows me to overhear those full-throated officers singing as Mozart blares from the confiscated Victor Victrola. But it's only when my uncle pronounces phonographos, the antique crankshaft revolves in my hand and sets the valley echoing with all those O's. A disc so dark, not even some golden Silver Age arpeggios could lighten the shade of the olive groves. It's a month before the plastic O of the breathing tube was put in his mouth. My uncle tells me about the bonfire, just so that I know how the village glowed. It's Germans burning the furniture and some of the houses before they go. It's the muted O and gramophone and my grandmother's obdurate ghost who won't let go of the brazen O of its horn. It's the screech of the swallowed O in Phoenix and the O in the middle of immolation. That smoldering, unmollified O. And now it's the O at the end of Velcro that straps the tube to his mouth and keeps the dying fable ablaze in my uncle's throat, unspeakable. It's my aunt from Akuvos, the only one alive who would know, saying, Orki, Nazis no killer. I hear she die of stroke, but me too young to know. It's those rows of oleanders leaning, partisan this way, collaborant that, depending upon who swung from them. My cousin Angelo must pass below to get to Ayaya's overgrown stone. The one oblivion's river, however the oleanders hover over the names, flows under just the same. It's the O in the ouzo that Angie pours, and showing us her photos, lo, of a date engraved in granite, a date that's later than the close of the war. Yet does it denote the year of death or the atonement of reinterment, dear cousin? We toast your devotion, but drink oblivion's river, smoky as ouzo, smoky as the ossified O of the open pit where the bones are exhumed. O record revolving on Clotho spindle, verse needle at home in the line's dark groove. O flaming, familial, apocryphal tomes, the O in Victrola, dark as the O in Gladiola, is golden Mozart. Sing by osmosis, O muse. I should have mentioned that Clotho is one of the three fates who unfurl the thread of and spread it out and cut it. I'll finish with one more poem. It's called Veil, and it's on the handout, a very short one. Veil. Caught in a sun shower on my way to school, I once took shelter by ducking under a willow. Its branches hung down so low, they swept the street. I was stepping through beaded curtains, thick as catkins. The rainwater glittered, running down the vines. My books and their slung green satchel stirred like seedlings. Black earth, moist roots, the bowl mouth oozing tar. I could have waited things out in the candy store, but I was shy. I was the firstborn. For years, I never knew why. Those elderly relatives would look at me that way. They spoke no English. Their coats were heavy. Whatever they'd been through, I stepped back out from under the veil of the willow, just as the dew was shining on everything, the houses, the sidewalk, even the dark Atlantic. I thank you so much. I really appreciate it.